All right, I think without further ado, we'll go ahead and start our panel discussion. I'd like to thank and welcome again for the wonderful opening remarks we had from Dr. Edward Murphy. Please, a round of applause. He's going to be helping to serve as moderator tonight. And I would like to introduce Laurence Fredrick to the stage, please. I'm not going to read everyone's bio so that you have more time to hear from them directly, but please, check these out because it's a really impressive, wonderful group of people who volunteered their time. I'd like to welcome to this. Come on. I'd like to welcome to the stage Army Command Sergeant Major Charlie Jones. And Erin Puckette. Recent graduate of Vinegar. Carrie Rhoades. And Dr. Christopher Goyne. Check. All right, I'm going to put a few levels. We're going to share our mics. Let's see, let's put it, why don't we put one in the middle here. I think you have the first question. All right. Hit it, Ed.
So my first question tonight is for Larry Fredrick. Larry is a former chairman of the astronomy department here at the University of Virginia, started at UVA in 1963. And we asked Larry to be here tonight because he was actually on the committee. He was the token astronomer who was on the committee that selected the landing sites for the Apollo missions. And so Larry, I just wanted to ask a little bit about how you got on that committee and a little bit about what you did on the committee. So first of all, how did you get on that committee to select the landing sites?
Does this work?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know. I think they decided, Tony Callio was chair of the committee, and I think he decided he needed an astronomer, because all the others were mostly engineers, and there was a reason for that, and 6 scientists, and they thought one of them should be an astronomer. So I suspect they went and asked Nancy Roman for an astronomer, Nancy Roman, and for some reason she chose me. She preceded me at my college by about 10 years, so I knew her. So
Larry, will
that's
you
why
talk into the mic just a little bit more?
Oh,
That's
okay.
great, like that. Yeah.
So I think maybe she was the one who said, Larry can be your man.
So what did you do on the committee? What was the work of the committee?
Well, they were interested in a number of things. They started before there were very many pictures to go by, so they wanted to know what the size of the rocks were and so on, and we had some information on that. They wanted to know how much compression there would be from an object as large as the moon. Would there be strata of rocks in the crevasses and so forth, but there was just a bunch of homework to do.
And just so that people understand, there was a bit of a Charlottesville connection besides you here at the University of Virginia. I also understand McCormick Observatory was used by some of the U.S. Geological Survey people for the making of moon maps and confirming things.
Right. McCormick Observatory and actually Lowell Observatory also for mapping the moon. Started very crudely, but now they have pictures that are much better than the maps.
Mm-hmm. So, Larry, did you get the chance to see any of the launches?
Oh yes, I did. I was not, of course, at Apollo 11, but I had an experiment on Apollo 13. Of course, the experiment didn't work because they had to head back. But I went to see 13 launch, and I think it was 15 also I saw.
So can you describe for those that haven't seen a rocket launch up close, especially a Saturn V up close, what was it like?
Very exciting. First of all, we were about 3 miles away, and the announcer said, "And we have liftoff." And there was all this smoke and everything, but that rocket just sat there. And it sat there. And then it was slowly going. It's not like the shuttle is, the shuttle goes boom and up it goes. But the Saturn was a very graceful, slowly stuff, and faster and faster.
Can you describe the sound? Chris and Erin and I recently had the opportunity to watch a rocket launch from the eastern shore of Virginia, which was a much smaller rocket than the Saturn V. What was the sound like?
The Saturn V, you didn't need your heart to beat. It was working. Really a compression wave that you just can't describe.
And just one last question for now is where were you when Apollo 11 landed and astronauts first set foot on the moon? How were you watching it? Where were you at the time?
Well, it was in the summertime, and we had summer students and people working on projects and everything. So they all met in my living room. I had a very large color television, and we watched television for about 30 hours. It was really exciting, to say the least.
Thank you, Larry. My next question, I'll move over to talk to Chris for a second. Chris is an associate professor in the Department of Mechanical and Aerospace Engineering here at the University of Virginia. And he and Erin, the student next to him, are, in fact, just a little more than a week ago, had a satellite launched into space that was built right here at UVA. So Chris, could you tell us about the CubeSat program and what a CubeSat is?
Yeah, so actually I brought a model. This is actually a model of a 1U CubeSat, and we saw the Saturn V rocket in the documentary. It was about 40 stories high, and believe it or not, this is a spacecraft. Modern computers and electronics have got to the size where we can fit all the major systems of a spacecraft inside something this small. And given that they're so small, that we can now have students actually design and build and test and actually operate spacecraft. And so as part of an undergraduate course at the University of Virginia that I teach, we've actually had students design one of these CubeSats or spacecraft. And it's been launched into space as part of a resupply mission to the International Space Station. And then these small satellites get pushed out through an airlock on the Japanese module of the space station into space. And this particular CubeSat, this is a model of the CubeSat at full scale, and it was launched from NASA Wallops, as Ed mentioned, and we were able to go and visit and see the launch. And it was in April, and then on July 3rd, it was went out through the airlock on the space station and into orbit. And so we're actually in the process of establishing radio communications with the spacecraft. We have a ground station and antenna at the University of Virginia, and we actually have students that are working to establish radio contact with it to start downloading the data. And we're actually working in collaboration with Virginia Tech, who have also built another CubeSat similar to this one at Old Dominion University, and with an organization called the Virginia Space Grant Consortium. And Erin here was actually the student leader for the entire mission, and she managed, we actually had about 150 students involved in the program over about 3 years, but Erin actually led the student activities as part of the mission.
Chris, can you tell us what the purpose is, the research mission of the CubeSat Constellation?
Yeah, so we had 2 objectives as part of the mission. One is an educational one. One is just to give students hands-on experience designing, assembling, testing, and flying spacecraft, so that they could be better prepared for working, for NASA or in industry or in academia. And then the technical objective was to measure drag of spacecraft as they orbit around the Earth. So even though they're in space, there's actually still some air up there, and it actually slows down the spacecraft and will actually cause them to re-enter the atmosphere eventually and then burn up. But we don't have good models of the atmosphere at those altitudes, and believe it or not, the atmosphere actually varies, the properties of the atmosphere vary with the activity of the sun. And as the sun becomes more active, the atmosphere expands, and that changes the density of air where the spacecraft are flying. And so it's actually difficult to predict how much drag there'll be on a spacecraft and then where it will land for re-enters the atmosphere. And so we're trying to get data and information on the drag on these spacecraft so we can better, we can validate the accuracy of these models of the atmosphere.
So our next question is going to be for Sergeant Major Jones here. I've had the pleasure of working with Sergeant Major Jones on a few panel discussions. The Chasing the Moon series, for those of you who have watched it, it not only covers the topic of space, it also reflects upon this particular time in our history in general, including the Civil Rights Movement, race relations, the Vietnam War, and politics. And so, I keep wanting to call you Charlie. So, Sergeant Major Jones, you grew up in Charlottesville, and you joined the Army at 17. In July of 1969, you were stationed in Fort Hood, Texas, having just returned from serving 3 years in Vietnam. 1 year in Vietnam. Where did I get that? Okay, 1 year in Vietnam. Oh, okay. And then, but what I wanted you to talk about is, you were telling me about a peaceful protest that you participated in while serving at Fort Hood at this time in our history. Talk about that and why you participated.
Well, I was stationed at Fort Hood once I came.
Check,
I
check.
came back
Yeah.
from.
Just have to be a little closer.
Oh, a little closer. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, I got a big mouth anyway. I was stationed at Fort Hood when down in Goyne, Texas, when I returned from Vietnam in 1968. In 68, race relations weren't that good, even in the military. Seemed like to me, they sent all the combat soldiers to Fort Hood, Texas. And we had a little second lieutenants and company commanders, in which normally a company commander is a captain. So they were fresh out of OCS, and I guess they had, most of them from the South, Mississippi, Alabama. Not to say that, there was a lot of prejudice in those states, but the black soldier, we made mistakes and we messed up. The punishment was a little harsher than compared to our counterpart, the white soldiers. When I served in Vietnam in 1967, you didn't pay any attention to the race. We were there for one mission. Our country sent us there because they felt we needed to defend democracy. And Vietnam, the communists were trying to take over Vietnam. So we were there to stop the spread of communism. So it didn't make any difference what color you were or what race you were. We were all just like this. Everybody were brothers. And we looked out for each other, covered each other's back. But when I arrived at Fort Hood, I tried to go back to Vietnam because of the atmosphere there. It was a very racially ignited atmosphere, with black soldiers. And I'm gonna tell you one thing, when we got off the plane, when we hit the ground from Vietnam after 1 year, my white counterpart buddies that were just like this with me, when we hit the ground in the United States up at Fort Lewis, Washington, they went their way, the black soldiers went their way. So, and at Fort Hood, it wasn't too much different when I got down there. And I tried to put my paperwork in to go back to combat. Now, who would want to go back to combat? after 1 year. And the stuff that I seen, our fellow young soldiers being killed and having to put them in body bags. I experienced that at the age of 18. So I was very young. I guess most kids are still in high school at 18, hadn't graduated yet, but I was in combat 2 months after I turned 18. So I grew up real quick. But at Fort Hood, you know, I couldn't stand to say I've been to risk, put my life on the line for my country because I believe in this country. We live in the greatest nation in the world. I mean, you can say that we rank up there, but we're the top. That's why everybody risked their lives to get here. So we live in a good country, one of the best opportunities. And so the soldiers got together, the black soldiers got together at Fort Hood in July of '68. And we protested the treatment of black soldiers that had done wrong. We don't admit that they didn't mess up somewhere. And most of the offenses were AWOL, absent without leave. Now, our counterpart white soldiers would go, now if you're over 30 days AWOL, you're a deserter. That's a court-martial offense. You know, you can be timed in stockade or kicked out the military. Well, I came home on leave in '68, and I stayed 2 extra weeks over my orders. So I admit that I was AWOL for 2 weeks. And I got back to Fort Hood, which is an Article 15 offense. You know, company grade, I was recommended for a special court-martial, the second highest court-martial that you could get. You could kill somebody, wouldn't get that one. But that's what I went through. I was a boxing champion at Fort Hood, light heavyweight, and I had all these letters signed by the battalion commander, company commander, and the 3-star general, the post commander, with their personal ink on it. And I went before the court-martial, and I presented all my letters signed, because I was a post boxing champion, 4th U.S. Army light heavyweight boxing champion. And they reduced the court-martial to a summary court-martial. So out of that court-martial, which equals to Article 15, but the word court-martial is bad. You know, because your 214 you get when you get out the military, you know, when somebody look at that, I never knew what that code meant on that, but I went back in the United States Army Reserve in 1981, and the recruiter looked it up and said, "Hey, Jones, you got a court-martial, didn't you?" Man, how you know that? Well, they had a code on my 214. I never knew what it meant, but he told me what it meant. He said, "But I'm gonna get you back in there. I'm gonna get you back in the Army Reserve, because you look like you done rolled up and matured a lot since then."
Thanks.
I don't want to take too long. So. But anyway, 300 black soldiers had a sit-down demonstration on Fort Hood. 2 main drags run to Fort Hood, Battalion Avenue. We sat there and blocked that up, all 4 lanes. And we had all kind of commanders come out and tell us to disperse. If we didn't make reveille, which was 6 o'clock in the morning, we would be put in the stockade, but we sat there. But I was one of the ones that chickened out. And I made reveille at 6 in the morning. I went back to my unit. But it's about 100 stayed, and they suffered a severe penalty for that. They were put in the stockade, and a whole lot of them were kicked out of the army with dishonorable discharges. But that was little race relations. And like I say, July, when they landed on the moon, I had a sense of pride. You know, I was proud of my country. Because I volunteered to go in the army. They didn't draft me. I wanted to go fight because I felt that that's what my country needed me to do.
All right, so our next question is for Erin, who just graduated from UVA and who was working on the CubeSat, who was the lead for the CubeSat project. But what I wanted to ask you about first was, obviously she was not born, or even close to being born when Apollo 11 landed, but talk about what your impression was when you, because you were studying and learning about this time in space, what was your impression?
So I will first admit that I was born in 1996. So I'm a baby. But yeah, so I think for me the biggest impact is looking at what they accomplished and what the technology was at that point, and just being in awe of that, because you sort of I graduated aerospace engineering, and you do all the orbital calculations, and I can barely get through those without a computer helping me and checking all of my math. So just the idea that they did that without that help is just, I'm in awe of that, complete awe. But I think it also inspires me for what we could possibly do with the current state of technology as it is. I think that that's truly exciting, and I'm truly excited to see sort of what technology comes out to be, and what we can do with it, and sort of how this ends up being shaped by a younger generation.
Well, and you were talking about just how smart those astronauts were and what they had to figure out, without computers, without a computer that was as smart as our smartphone.
Yeah, no, I think some of my favorite stories are the stories that I've heard countless times told by countless professors about how, they'd encounter problems and later missions, and, they just dumped stuff on tables, and the engineers would have to solve those problems and then sort of relay that back to the astronauts. And so I'm always just in awe of sort of just how they're able to be so resourceful and figure things out, and yet be so calm and just well spoken and just well put together as they went through everything, because I would be a frazzled mess.
Well, and you also were talking, when we had a conversation earlier about, we were just talking about what inspired you in general to go into to the field that you're in, and you had this fabulous mentor.
Yeah, so I had a really interesting sort of high school experience in that I went to an all-girls school, but my math teacher in 6th grade actually had her PhD in physics, which is a bit of a high degree for a 6th grade math teacher, which I came to realize later. But it was amazing to have her as a teacher, because she would always look at me and say, Erin, at that point I thought that I would do history. That made sense to me. I knew I was good at that. But she sat down with me and pointed out that, I was actually pretty good at math, and she tutored me all through 7th grade. While I was in 7th grade, she tutored me all through 8th grade math, and she and I have stayed in contact. She actually left to go to Canada to do research, but she came back my senior year of high school, and I still go visit her every time I'm home in Charleston, and I'm still talking to her to this day. And so she's just had an amazing impact on me and encouraging me to do whatever I set my mind to, whatever I decided was what I wanted to do.
And that's all it takes, mentors, a few mentors to say, hey, you're good at this, you could be good at this, do you like this? I just love hearing stories like that.
And I think sort of one of the cool things for me too is just when I came through at UVA was that there were a large number of women faculty, and that was really cool to see. I sort of didn't realize how rare that was until after I've sort of been through it a little bit, but they were some of my favorite professors, and to get to have Kathy Thornton as a professor, since she was an astronaut, was just...
She couldn't make it here tonight. She's traveling a lot.
The students we'd always love to just sit down and just get her to tell stories, and just to be taught by her, and to go sit in her office hours and have her explain basic things to us. It was always fun, and that was just inspiring to get to, for her to be the first astronaut that I talked to, and for her to be sort of the first real encounter with space was a woman, she sort of inspired me in that way.
That's great.
So my next question is for Carrie. Carrie Rhoades is a senior engineer in the Engineering Directorate at NASA Langley. And Carrie, you've worked on the Orion spacecraft, and you've worked on Lofted. And if you could tell us a little bit about the work that you've been doing on both of those and how that pertains to the future of spaceflight.
So I've been on and off Lofted for a number of years. Lofted is an inflatable reentry vehicle. This is a mock-up of the newest one that we're going to be doing. But the textile industry has been changing, and we've got a lot of new materials that have come out. One of the limits of going to someplace like Mars is the heat shield itself. We have to have something larger than what we're currently capable of. Currently, you're limited by the size of the rocket shroud. Right now, it's the size of a Mini Cooper is the largest thing that we've landed on Mars. If we're going to put people there and come back from Mars, we're going to have something larger. NASA's been studying various heat shield technologies, and Lofted has become one of the primary candidates for going to Mars because it's inflatable, because we can scale it up and make it larger and larger depending on what's going and what the need is. But it's all about flexible materials, being able to package ceramics. I will say I had to learn about sewing. So to pull out and call up mom and say, okay, what's this seam, what's that seam? Because it's all about strength of materials, and sewing changes when you do different sewing techniques. So it's been very interesting working on something that's very different than our standard heat shield material. Now, going back to Orion uses the standard heat shield material. We've been doing that since about 2006, I think, was the first time I worked on Orion. I was out at Armstrong. It was Dryden at the time, out in California. But it was interagency. We used all of the NASA centers to build Orion. And we just did our Sun abort down at KSC just last week. So that was really exciting to see some of the things that I've worked on actually finally fly. And it's flown before, but it's not been to space yet. But this was the big abort test, which was pretty impressive. So we're really excited about Orion continuing on.
Going back to NASA Langley for a second, Larry, in the early days, in the Mercury program in particular, you were involved with training some of the astronauts at NASA Langley and got to know some of the astronauts. Can you tell us a little bit about that, who you got to know and what it was like working with them and socializing with them?
Well, they wanted to know answers to various astronomical questions, what they would see when they're in space and so on. I didn't have too much to do with them because the manned space project went to Houston.
But you did get to know some of the astronauts.
Oh, yes. Well, in Houston is where I got to know them. I got to know Neil Armstrong quite well. And in fact, those of us who were on the committee for the landing sites, we would talk about the astronauts, who was going to do this, who was going to do that, and all that. But we all agreed that the first one was going to be Armstrong. He was unflappable. When he was flying, he flew by the book, not by his hands and all that. If it said, do it this way, he did it that way. But when trouble came, he knew how to handle it.
Was he as taciturn as they say in the video?
Oh, yes.
Chris, the next question is for you. Can you compare some of the technology that you have in your hand there and some of the technology that's going into these CubeSats with the technology that they had in the 1960s?
Yeah, so you know, watching the documentary, it's really just amazing to see what was done, 50 years ago. But fundamentally, rockets, present-day rockets, are fundamentally not very different from the rockets of the 60s and 70s. The pointy end still goes up and the fire comes out the bottom. But there have been improvements in materials, but probably and design. But probably the biggest change has been in the electronics and computers. And things have been automated. So spacecraft can be flown autonomously, and the computers are also available to help design the spacecraft and design the rockets. And so it's a little bit like a family car. If you think about a family car in the 60s and 70s versus a family car today, there's still an engine, usually internal combustion engine, unless you're driving an electric car, there's still four wheels. But you think about a car today, there's computers that are running the engine, there's computers running the entertainment system, the car's more comfortable, it's more efficient. and it's easier to operate. So it's similar with spacecraft and rockets today. And you know, there's computers helping the people design it, and computers helping people operate from the ground and in the sky, and so in space. And so even with our spacecraft, you know, we had a small computer on board our CubeSat that was running the spacecraft. And if you think about the computers that were on board the Apollo mission spacecraft, there was a computer on the lunar lander that was about the size of a suitcase, and another one on the command module, and that was actually small for the day. And the memory on board those computers is about 1 million times less than what's on my smartphone in my pocket. And so you know, computers have really enabled us to do a lot more with the technology that's available to us today.
And Chris, can I ask a question? What inspired you to become a mechanical and aerospace engineer and get involved in the space industry?
Yeah, so I was also born after the Apollo mission. I was born in '70, and well, it's after the first landing. You know, the Apollo mission, I don't remember the Apollo mission, so I was so young. So I grew up in Australia, on the other side of the world, and Australia actually participated in the early space missions because we had a tracking station, so that the astronauts could still communicate with the US via a tracking station in the outback of Australia. However, I do remember the space shuttle program, and during the early flights of the space shuttle flights, they publicized where the orbiter was flying, and so they told you the time of day you could go out, and if it was close to sunset or close to sunrise, the sun illuminated the orbiter. And I remember as a young child going outside and actually looking up with binoculars and seeing the outline of the space shuttle. So that was really what inspired me to get involved in aerospace and mechanical engineering in general. And it's something that inspiration is something that I try to instill in the students that I teach in spacecraft design today.
So, Sergeant Major Jones, I'm thinking about we're talking about the technology and how it's changed from '69 to now. Well, when we're talking about race relations, as we were talking earlier, you and I were both saying in a conversation that we had earlier that we have come a long way, but that we still have work to do. And you had some good advice. What do you think we need to do?
When I looked at a lot of programs on TV, Rita Dove was up at the UVA, had some type of a series going on, and the question was asked her at the end, do you ever think that racism and race will ever, you know, everybody be on an equal playing field? She didn't answer the question, and she's supposed to be, you know, she's supposed to know. But I answered the question sitting in my living room, and my answer was no. It's something that we need to continue to work on as long as man exists, because there's always going to be somebody that wants to be superior, and you can't change people's minds because some people keep the same attitudes. You know, I don't care what you do nice and good and what accomplishments you make, but there's always going to be people out there that think negative. So it's something that we're going to have to work on till the end of man, and because we got to improve it.
And you said we have to have hard conversations.
Hard conversations that people don't like to talk about, because all of us live on this planet together, and all of us here live in Charlottesville together. I grew up here, and I saw the signs downtown that said for whites only. You know, I could read. I know when my mother took me up to the University Hospital when I was a little guy, I I used to catch poison ivy. And right there on University Avenue in the old part of the hospital, you got these steps going up. We used to have a little clinic that you went underneath those steps and went in a door. You paid 25 cents. You sat in the clinic. Cause I used to look like a mummy. All over me. So, and then the doctor would call you, and for that 25 cents, he'd give you some penicillin. Used to help me a lot. He gave me penicillin in about 3 days and started disappearing. But I caught poison ivy every year. And I knew what it looked like, but I couldn't stay out of it. But anyway, we've come a long ways since that time in Charlottesville. Like I was telling this young lady here, I remember when the A&P was right here, the grocery store. And that's back there some years ago. Some of the older guys in here remember. Because I used to sell Daily Progress up and down Main Street. Paper mail, paper shirt, 5 cents a paper. I think they've gone up to $1.75. It ain't nothing in them.
Thank you, Charlie.
So Carrie, this next question's for you. Erin alluded to the fact, and Chris talked about the fact of the importance of mentors to students. And NASA has a fantastic internship program. And in your time at Langley and before, you've supervised and mentored and worked with over 100 students. Can you tell us a little bit about the importance, both to you personally and to NASA, about mentoring and teaching the next generation of engineers and scientists?
Sure. So I myself was an intern when I first started at NASA. I was an intern even before that. I worked for Lockheed Martin then. But I was treated as an engineer. I grew significantly as an engineer being an intern. I got to see the things that I liked and what I didn't like, and so I would like to continue that with teaching new people that are new to aerospace. It's okay not to know things. I mean, that was one of the things that it's intimidating when you get to a new job and everyone seems to know everything and you don't. So to me, it's, make sure to establish that with the new students, that it's okay not to already know what the difference between an F-15 and an F-16 is. That, you can learn these things and it's not that you should already know them. But I've worked with small teams, I've worked with large teams. I will say I would appreciate having more color apply and even more females. It's one of the challenges that I have every year of actually finding people that bring different information and different ways of thinking. It was something I got accused of several times when I was in school, of thinking differently. Now I embrace it, hence the purple hair. But yes, I mean, it's one of those that, yes, we think differently and that's okay. It brings a different perspective. It actually makes the programs better. So I like to make sure that people are aware that they can be different and still participate in NASA. It actually makes us better. So bring them on.
Excellent. Thank you.
That's great. So Erin, we want to talk about when you served as lead student for the Virginia CubeSat Constellation project. Talk about the role, what your role was in the project, and the impact that this opportunity has had on you as an engineer and as a person.
All right, so my primary role, I sort of got onto it and I was excited about sort of the technical side of it. I'd been training as an engineer and that's where I was thrilled to learn more about. But I think my role ended up being more along the lines of a major communicator. So I was the lead among 4 universities, but we have 3 satellites being developed, and my primary role was making sure that we were all talking to each other, and that we were all on the same page, and that we were communicating with outside groups like NASA and with other companies that we had to talk to and make sure that our satellite could get up to space. So that was a massive learning curve for me, just learning how to work with that amount of people. I mean, Dr. Goyne alluded to it, but it was a large project, and for a student stepping into that role, that was a big thing for me to do. Dr. Goyne was great with me when I was fumbling through the first few weeks, months of the project. But that was a really big thing for me. I think one of the exciting things was that the 3 leads from each of the universities, it was 3 girls. So the people who I worked closely with were 2 other girls from Old Dominion and Virginia Tech. And so that was a really unique relationship that we developed. And I harassed them every day for a summer. I think they resented me for that, but it's fine, they still text me back. But I think that was truly exciting to have the 3 of us sort of be the leads of the project and get to be the face, especially as the project went to launch and is now in space and orbiting. So that was really cool, really exciting for me.
And then working with everyone at NASA Langley. I mean, you talk about that because I think that was an incredible experience for you.
Yeah, so it was really great. I mean, as Carrie alluded to, I think one of the biggest learning things for me was I was a 4th-year engineer. You know, thought I was top of the world, thought I knew everything. I didn't. I learned that very quickly. So I think for the engineering teams, learning to acknowledge that we didn't know anything. We were very confused, and being willing to reach out to people like Carrie and like other people in industry and say, I don't know, help me. And to see the response that we'd get, I think I called and emailed Carrie many times going, Carrie, I don't know what this is, I don't know what I'm doing, or can you help me find somebody who knows what they're doing about this, because we're just confused. And they were always so gracious with us and helpful to make sure that we knew what we were doing. And it was also really cool too to get to actually work with people in industry and be treated like engineers, because we had bought these components to build the satellite. And so to be able to have these conversations with them about putting a satellite into space was unparalleled for an undergraduate.
And what you might say to somebody in this room who is young and not, and getting, making their way through middle school and headed to high school, what words of wisdom might you impart?
I think I've had sort of 2 major takeaways that, your attitude is everything. That there were many times along the project that you could have been very pessimistic and just thrown the towel in, and we thought that it was the end-all be-all. I thought the project was going to fall apart and that it was never going to make it. But having a positive attitude about it and sort of being willing to reevaluate the situation, look at it differently. But also just being willing to just perpetually throw yourself at it. I was working with a group of engineers at UVA who I was always admired by their tenacity. We'd always come upon a problem and think that, oh, this is the end, we can't fix it, but we keep throwing ourselves at it and asking questions and acknowledging to people that we needed help, and usually a solution would come about. And they're in space now, so that's exciting.
So we could take just a couple of couple of questions from the audience. I'm going to come around with the microphone. You went up first.
Actually, yes, sir.
We're just moving.
Yes. So actually, before I ask my question, I just want to say, there's a lot of smack being talked about the Apollo guidance computers and how underpowered they were, but man, those were brilliant architecture at the time, and the software design led by Margaret Hamilton up at MIT, those 1201, 1202 alarms basically saved the mission because of the software design she did. And there's actually a series on YouTube. There's a bunch of guys who actually just restored one of the few remaining Apollo guidance computers. And go on YouTube and watch it. It's fascinating. You'll get your geek quotient. But we've got basically 3 generations of space people here. And so, well, I'd like to kind of get your perspective on where to go now. I mean, right now, you alluded to this, we've had 4 different presidents send us off in all sorts of different directions. We've got a rocket, the Space Launch System, that we spend a lot of money for, and it's not anywhere near as capable as Saturn. So, for each of you, if you were president, and I'm gonna focus. If you were the president and the administrator of NASA, and Nancy Pelosi and McConnell got together and said, we're going to write you the biggest check that you want, where would you take the space program? What do you think our next steps would be?
That's great. Okay, really down the line quickly.
So
Everybody.
I'm a huge believer now in this, the inspiration of the space program to be able to inspire future generations. As a scientist, I would argue that the robotic exploration of Mars will probably produce more science for less cost, but I don't want to discount that inspiration, and so if I were to be given a blank check, it would be a human mission to Mars.
I'm not sure where it'll go. But I think industry will push this way and that, and there will be one of them that works, and you go that way and further and further and further.
So I actually do believe in the moon and then Mars. So it's one of those that to me, you want to be able to bring people back if there's an issue. And Mars puts that a little bit out of reach in my opinion, at least at this point in time with the current technology we have. So I'm a firm believer in we go to the moon first, establish that. For those of us that have never seen a moon landing, establish that again as well.
Yeah, I heard that.
I want to point out, like, the X-plane, the man X-planes, the last one was in the 90s, and so we're finally doing X-planes again, so it's great that we're finally going back to the moon again. So I'd really like to see someone land on the moon. I'll volunteer. Oh, wait. But yes, I believe moon and then Mars.
I think you're sort of seeing there's not general agreement within the community, I think, of what should be next. But I think probably practically what will happen is that the moon will be more of a commercial enterprise for industry, and that NASA will probably end up focusing more on long-term, exploration of Mars. The commercial payoff for a Mars mission is probably not there yet. But for lunar missions, space tourism is going to be really big. I think there's going to be people that want to go to the moon and stay in a hotel, either on the moon or in orbit. It won't be cheap, but it'll get cheaper. Where we were paying $10,000 a pound to get into orbit. It's starting to get down around $1,000 per pound, so you can add it up based on the last time you weighed yourself. And there's also, they think there's also water on the poles in the bottoms of the craters, and so that water can be used to make rocket fuel, to make hydrogen and oxygen. So there are some commercial applications involving the moon, and so I think NASA focusing on Mars would probably is probably a better long-term goal.